Yeah, thanks guys for coming. London Tech Week as well, so there's like 25 events going on at any moment in time, so you've obviously picked the best one. Although it seems like a lot of people that bought arcade or got tickets in actually arrived. So we've got two speakers. For those of you who don't know how it works, Nirish will speak first, then Jason will go second, and then we'll do a Q&A after that, after an hour, so half an hour each. So hold your questions till the end. We'll have drinks upstairs as well, so obviously feel free to network and connect with everyone. Now you know everyone and what they do and their names, so like
there'll be a test.
It's super easy, yeah, definitely. We got hashtag mobile, so feel free to use it. And yeah, enjoy it. So over to you, Nirish, and please introduce yourself.
Cool, thanks, Nobit. So yes, my name is Nirish, and I work for a company called Now TV. I almost forgot what company I work for. So a bit about me. So I work as a UX lead there. So in my team, I work with some really talented designers, both UX, UI, and copywriters. We have copywriters as part of the UX team as well. And yes, I'm very humbled to be working, along with them. I also work as a UX coach and trainer, so which means I actually go out to other companies and clients and coach them in like UX methods and processes and how to basically increase their level of design awareness and maturity within organizations. I think a lot of UX and design is not just about making beautiful wireframes and pictures and things like that, but it's also about changing people's mentalities around how you think about the design of products and how you actually think about the people that you're designing for. I think that's a bigger challenge in a lot of our roles. I'm a Nepalese Australian, so I was born in Nepal, but then I moved to Australia and met a beautiful girl. That's my wife, Siobhan. That was our first wedding anniversary in an island called Waiheke, next to Auckland in New Zealand. Anyone from Auckland or New Zealand here? No? A beautiful part of the world. Yeah, just because I'm a Nepalese doesn't mean that I've climbed Mount Everest. And just because I'm Australian doesn't mean I know how to surf. So that probably puts me in the lowest kind of common denominator for both nationalities. And also just a bit of a marketing. Yes, we are looking to hire UX designers and researchers and UI designers. So if you're just looking for a role at Now TV or Skype, just let me know. So speaking of consistency, I was in Morocco last week, and so there was a few things that happened in our kind of trip across Morocco that kind of remind me of consistency or lack thereof. So our plan was to basically kind of fly into Marrakesh, which is here. Has anyone here been to Morocco? Yeah, a couple of people there. So it's a really amazing country, really beautiful. So I didn't know anything about Morocco, so I went online, did some research, and I found this riad or hotel kind of thing where you could stay in Marrakesh, and also found that they offer this kind of desert tour, where you can actually go out to the desert for like 4 days, spend some night in the desert and like drive around Morocco. So when I went online to the website, I found that they would depart from Marrakesh and take us to this place called Orzat, where they've shot like Game of Thrones and Star Wars and Indiana Jones and stuff. And they told us that from there they're going to take us to this desert called Zagora, which is like this awesome kind of Saharan desert where you can ride camels. And from there they told us that they're going to take you to the Mazuga desert. It's another desert there. And on the website they said, okay, from there we'll drop you off at the village near Erfoud. And I was like, okay, that actually works really well with our plans, because we actually wanted to go to this town called Fez, which is kind of in the northern part of Morocco, and there's like a bus that goes from Erfoud to Fez, so it works out really well. So I booked a trip, went to the hotel in Marrakesh, and they took us on the bus ride from Marrakesh to Orzat. But from Orzat, what they did, that was our plan. What they did was basically they took us from Orzat to Mazuga. And I didn't know what was happening because I didn't have a phone with me. I thought like that was Zagora. And what they did was from Mazuga, they took us back to Orzat. And they were like, all right, you're going to get off here. And we're like, why? And they told us that there's another bus group coming from Marrakesh, which will pick you up and take you to Zagora. We're like, okay, this is not what was written on the website. And the driver of the tour, the bus, was like, what website? They didn't know there was a website for the tour company. So they didn't know there was this description of the website and a proper itinerary of the tour that was listed on the website. So the plan then they gave us, that was, they're going to take us from OZ to Zagora, and from Zagora, they're going to take us back to Marrakesh. And we already had bus tickets from here going back. So there was definitely a lack of consistency in terms of the message that I got on the website when I was checking it on London, and the message that the bus driver gave me, on the ground. So there was no way we're going to do this trip all the way to Zagora and back to Marrakesh because we didn't have time. So what we did was, wherever they dropped us off, this random restaurant in the middle of nowhere, and we're just waiting for the other tour bus. So luckily, we found this random guy who randomly happened to have a taxi lying around, and he offered to give us a ride. And finally, after a lot of kind of bargaining, he brought it down to £250 for this 700-kilometer journey. So it's definitely the most expensive and the longest taxi ride ever in our lives. And finally, after like 11 hours, we reached Fez. So it's not the most pleasant end to the desert tour, but I think there's lots of stories to tell, and this is one of them. So what do you think was the problem there? What went wrong?
Outdated info.
Yep, outdated info.
And communication.
Lack of communication. A lot of the touch points in the user's journey didn't even know the other touch points existed. The very major touch point, which is the driver didn't know the website existed and what was actually listed on the website. Maybe the person who even created the website didn't have any idea of what the actual journey like. So there's a lot of the kind of lack of communication. There's a lot of gaps in between in the experience that resulted in this lack of consistency between the different touch points. Today we finally reached Fez. So why consistency? Now we're all designers here. We're all in the traditional industry, so we probably don't even we already know what consistency was all about. So we all know that consistency helps your systems become more predictable. The more consistent they are, the more predictable they are. And the more predictable they are, that means the more learnable they are, the easier it is to learn, because you can easily predict what's going to happen next. And if you can predict easily what's going to happen next, it's easy to learn what's going to happen next. And if you can learn it more easily, that means it's more usable. And if something is more usable, if something is easier to use, that means it's easier to do what you want to do with it, attain your goals. And ultimately, as designers, developers, engineers, that is our ultimate goal, is to help our users achieve their goals as fast as possible. And if something's not consistent, then that means we're not achieving our goal. So what needs to be consistent then? When we're designing things or making things, what needs to be consistent? Yeah, the message.
The experience is what I was guessing.
What do you mean by the experience?
Well, the customer experience is as well as what I told them the
Yeah.
experience.
I guess things like the language that we use and the language that we see in people's faces
Mhm.
and when we go into a shop and talk to staff, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the tone of voice, things like that. Okay. Yeah.
UI elements, like buttons, links.
Yeah, buttons, links, what the user actually sees. And I think, you're right. I think that's one of the key things that all of us actually think about when we think of consistency in terms of, things have to be consistent across devices and platforms, responsive design and whatnot. But I think we all talked about, I think consistency is more than that. It's more than screen deep. And I think there's different layers to consistency that we need to think about. It's not just about what we see on the screen, but the UI and just the language and stuff. But it also goes, I think, deeper than that. And when I think of UX, I think in terms of layers. like Shrek. Things of ogres as having layers, just like onions. Does anyone remember this? Maybe I will. And also, I think UX also has layers, and there's, I think, 3 layers of consistency that we need to consider when we're talking about consistency in UX. And those layers actually come from this little diagram here. Has anyone seen this? Quite a few people. It's by this guy called James Garrett. He's written a book called Elements of User Experience. Really good book. And he's basically kind of mapped out the different layers of user experience of a product in these kind of 5 layers. Starting off with your business goals and user goals, and moving up the fidelity chain, functional requirements, interactions, interface, visuals, and the shiny kind of surface. And to simplify this kind of layers, what I've done is I've basically divided them into 3 smaller, simple layers, which is you've got your goals, your vision, what you want to achieve. And the second is you've got your interaction framework, how the user would go about achieving those goals. And finally, the shiny surface, the interface, what the user would see to achieve those goals. So let's look at the first one, goals. And the number 1 rule that I follow when it comes to achieving consistency in goals, and when I talk about goals, I'm not just talking about user goals, I'm also talking about business goals, and also talking about goals for maybe the tech team. And one of the things that we do consistently at NowTV to make sure that we do get consistency in goals is we collaborate early and we collaborate often. Now, I remember when I first started at NowTV, there wasn't a lot of collaboration, especially in my team. I mean, there was collaboration with the design team, but there was not much collaboration between, say, the design team and the dev team, and maybe the design team and the business, the business team, and so on. So the way it looked like was, we had these kind of teams, and the way collaboration usually happened was the PO or the product owner would kind of chuck their requirements over to the fence, to the UX team. The UX team would then chuck wireframe space and requirements over to the UI team. And the UI team would then chuck all the visuals based on the requirements over to the dev team. And then by the time it reaches the dev team, the PO would have no clue what's been kind of built. And when we take the thing back to the POs or the business stakeholders, they were like, it's not what we wanted. It's not what we asked for. It's completely different to what we actually required. And in fact, this scenario is actually a lot better than what we used to go through as a developer. Like I used to be a developer like 10 years ago. And back in my days, this is how it used to work. We had no clue that these roles even existed. I had never heard of user experience design or anything like that. And yes, POs would definitely just chuck the requirements straight to the devs, and we just go on coding straight away. And our KPIs were based on the number of lines we shipped at the end of the day. It was not about the experience. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that time. So yeah, we had this kind of solid process where if this bit is the level of involvement for these different stakeholders, the way it looked like was the product owner would spend probably the majority of the time in the earlier stages getting the requirements and then jumping across to the UX designer, who would then spend a lot of time in this stage, the wireframe stage. UI designers would probably just spend the time here, and the developers would spend their time at the end. So as you can see, there was a lot of kind of walls in between the teams, and there was lack of consistency in terms of what they thought the overall vision of the product was, or the overall goals of the product was. So what we then decided to do was we decided to actually kind of break down these walls a bit. So what we did instead was we started off with more of a collaborative ideation, where everyone puts in some level of kind of involvement early on. So as you can see, everyone is involved at the beginning, where everyone gets together and then just has like a kickoff session or like a workshop around, okay, what are the business goals? for this particular feature or for this particular product we're creating. What are the user goals? What do we think the users need to do out of these products or the features? And can we come up with some solutions together? So it's all about trying to figure out what's in the heads of all these different stakeholders without even writing a single line of code, without even waiting till the end to find out, okay, whether it's the right product to build or not. And we have these checkpoints as well at the end of every fidelity to get together and make sure that we're on the right track. So one of the workshops that we always run is called a design studio workshop. Now the design studio workshop is a collaborative design workshop. Has anyone heard of design studio workshop? Yeah. It's a very kind of popular methodology run in a lot of design houses where you invite people, not just from the design team, but from other teams as well. So you can invite developers, you can invite product owners, you can invite the marketing team, salespeople. And the whole point of it is just to make sure that everyone has a shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve. So that it's not just the product owners just dumping requirements to the other team and then them dumping something else to the other team, but everyone getting together and putting heads together and then making sure that, okay, this is what we're going to achieve at the end of the process. And the number one rule that we follow in a workshop like this is we always start on paper. Why is that? Why do we always start on paper? As in, why do we always say
It's quick.
Sorry?
It's quick.
It's quick, yes.
You don't feel precious.
Don't feel precious. Yeah, definitely.
It's easy to throw out.
It's easy to throw out, yeah. It's quick and it's precious, like you don't feel precious, it's easy to throw out. Yeah.
Anyone can draw on paper, so developers can actually feel part of the design process. It doesn't feel like you have to know really specific design skills to produce something valuable.
That's a great point, actually. It really kind of sets a level playing field. So, for example, if you're in a room full of designers, developers, salespeople, the designers usually they bring out their Photoshop wall, sketch or whatever, and doing some really fancy looking interfaces, and developers might come in and start coding something a prototype or something, or the salespeople might pull out their PowerPoint deck and start presenting and doing a sales pitch. But with just pen and paper, there's no way they can use all these fancy tools. They all have to use the same basic tools, which is pen and paper, which means that everyone has the same level of advantage and disadvantage. But in terms of why we use pen and paper, very valid answers: fast, easy to throw away. It's not precious, and the reason that we make sure that it's easy to throw away, and it's fast, is because of something called Sturgeon's law. Has anyone heard of Sturgeon's law? So Sturgeon's law is a very important law in design, and something that I've adhere to all the time. And Sturgeon's law basically states that 90% of everything is crap. Now what does that mean? 90% of everything is crap. That means 90% of everything is crap. Just what it says. And I truly believe in this law. You see, 90% of my ideas are so bad, I can't even talk about it. I do 90% of the time I have some really bad jobs. But what I try to do is I try to make sure that I filter out those 90% of my bad ideas as early as possible in the design process, so that I'm not investing my time and money on those bad ideas later on. And also, according to Sturgeon's law, 90% of meetings are crap. So there's a lot of bad meetings out there where you've got a hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, making most of the decisions. There's a lot of instances of what we call groupthink. Has anyone heard of groupthink? Groupthink is when everyone thinks the same. There's no kind of dissenting opinions. Everyone agrees. Or everyone thinks they agree. They might have all the different ideas in their head, but because in a traditional business meeting, we just talk, right? And we never try to understand each other. We just try to push our opinions on people. But when we actually start on paper and we actually draw out and sketch our ideas, then we start to see, okay, maybe it's not we probably don't agree, all of us. And that's when the beauty of the method actually comes out, when we start to cross-pollinate different ideas, different goals that people might have, and then we come up with something even better. And then we all agree on our vision. And that's what happens at a design studio workshop, where we start off with 5 minutes of creating. So everyone gets like a sheet of paper, a Sharpie, and everyone gets a user goal or a vision in terms of what we want to achieve. And everyone starts like, sketching out solutions and ideas in those 5 minutes. It's timed, very strictly timed. And after the 5 minutes, everyone then takes turn to present back their idea, pitch their ideas. And after that, the team then spends 2 minutes critiquing the person's ideas. So what they like, what they think should be improved. And then the person then takes all that critique and the feedback, and then they go back to creating. So in the second round, the second iteration, you then take all the feedback and then fine-tune your ideas or reiterate on the ideas. And you do that round again. And in round 2, something magical happens. What happens is, when you listen to all these ideas from other people, you automatically tend to steal all the good ideas. And I think stealing is really good for creativity. There's a saying called, good artists copy and great artists steal. I think it was Picasso that said.
He stole it.
He stole it, yeah. Like most things.
Picasso stole it as well.
Who? Picasso stole it.
I think so.
Who did he steal it from?
I remember hearing so it was.
Okay, so there we go. So great artists steal. So it's all about stealing and cross-pollination of ideas. And at the end of the workshop like this, you get a much better clarity in terms of what are the goals for the business, what are the goals for the user, and what's in our heads even before we draw our first proper wireframe or write our first line of code. And at the end, there's no surprises when it comes to all these different ideas that people have in there. So people are more consistent in their understanding of the problem. And without this consistent thinking, without this consistent understanding of the problem, you cannot have consistent solutions. That's the sad fact. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to basically go through this kind of design funnel, where you start off with this lower fidelity, moving on to higher fidelity, all the way to code. So when things are still cheaper and easier to fix, we come up with lots and lots of ideas. And not all of the ideas will be good. Most of them will probably be really crap. We then filter the ideas and slowly start to increase the fidelity as well. We might even come up with new ideas at different levels of fidelity. We keep on moving down the funnel, and finally we end up with an idea that actually works. Now, if we had only come up with one idea, like most businesses do, they only come up with one idea, and they stick to it, they spend all their time and money on that idea, and at the end, there's a 90% chance that it will be a crappy idea. That's why we like to basically follow this kind of design form, where things are easier and cheaper to fix at the beginning, and more difficult and expensive to fix towards the end. So you want to spend more time here when it's still cheaper and easier to fix things. So that was basically the consistency in terms of consistency in goals. The next one that we also look at, and that's it, is consistency in interactions. So the interaction framework in terms of what happens between the system and the user. So when it comes to interaction design or any user experience design, the thing that really frustrates me is that we focus so much on what we see on the screen. We spend so much time creating wireframes. Our success is pretty much measured by the number of wireframes you create. Especially if we show our clients a stack full of wireframes, they're happy. Doesn't matter if they're the correct solution or not. If the more wireframes there are, the better for the client. But the sad truth is that it doesn't take a genius to design a wireframe. You can ask a 5-year-old to draw a homepage for you, and they'll do it for you. You can probably ask Donald Trump to do it for you, and even Donald Trump can probably sketch a wireframe. So yeah, you don't need to be a UX designer to sketch a wireframe. But that's what we spend most of our time doing, sketching wireframes, whether it's paper sketches or miniature or balsamic or sketch or Illustrator, whatever. But the thing with wireframes is that we bring in our own kind of reality into it. And especially in an organization, everyone thinks they're a designer. You know, the PO thinks they're a designer, the branding team thinks they're a designer, and they're all bringing their own realities into these wireframes. So they think, oh yeah, let's put that button over there, or let's draw it like this, or let's call this thing this, and it's all based on opinions. And they all have their own kind of rose-tinted glasses that they wear to actually look at these wireframes, and then they try to mold the wireframes based on what suits them. And when you have these inconsistent perspectives, it is difficult to get consistent solutions. So what we need to do is to make sure that the perspective is consistent as well. How do we do that? How do we make sure that the perspective is consistent?
Do some research and throw out.
Yeah, why do some research?
Because then you actually know what people are doing and you're not trying to guess what they're doing from your own perspective. You've actually got some research to back up why.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, the one thing that is consistent for all of us is the customer. So when you think of the customer, we usually think in terms of what interface they're looking at, what device they might be using, what connection speeds and things like that they might have. But the thing is, there's this whole picture that's actually missing from our view a lot of times, where there's so many things that actually happen behind the scenes that can really affect the experience that your customers get. Things like, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to make a call? Are they trying to walk the dog? Are they trying to, order a pizza on their way home? And what is their attention span like? Do they have their full attention on the app, or are they trying to basically, worry about how to actually pick up the dog poop without, touching the poop while they're using your app, and worrying about dirtying the screen? So, but different things have to happen in the user's head when they're actually trying to use their app. And also things like goals, and what are they trying to achieve as a higher goal? So that brings us to this little methodology called Mobile First. Has anyone heard of Mobile First? Yeah, quite a few people. So Mobile First is basically the methodology of thinking mobile first and designing mobile screens first, so that when we move on to a desktop screen, it's easier to then move things over from a smaller screen to a bigger screen. But I think mobile first is a great thing, and that's what we do at Now TV. Like, we think mobile first. But I think there's something that needs to happen before mobile, which is scenarios first, before thinking of screens. So this whole concept of scenarios first came from this design agency called Cooper. There's a design agency in San Francisco. And they came up with something called goal-directed design. So thinking of the user's goals when you're actually deciding what should go in your designs. Now, scenarios. What are scenarios? Now, before I go into what are scenarios, I'm going to tell you what scenarios are not. A lot of times people think that user scenarios are the same as use cases or the same as user stories, but they're neither of them. See, use cases are more kind of, they're both more kind of system-centric. It's more about a stick figure, and it's not about a real human user. And user stories are just a list of requirements that you use to build your features or your product in Agile. So there's no kind of human connection in any of these tools. I mean, they're great tools, but it's not something that we use in design. So a scenario, on the other hand, is something of a description. It's a story, pretty much, which tells a story of a user or a persona trying to get to a goal and going on a journey to get to that goal. So it always starts with a little trigger. So it might be something like, the user is, John is hungry and wants to order some pizza. And that's a trigger that gets them to actually start on a journey to order some pizza. So it has the user's goal and things that the user does to get the goal. And the way we create these scenarios is we use a combination of both research data and storytelling skills, so both combination of art and science. So, and the beauty of this technique is anyone can do it. You don't have to be a designer or a developer or an engineer to do it. You know, it can be anyone in the team creating these scenarios. Another thing about these scenarios is they're agnostic to specific solutions. So it doesn't talk about, oh yeah, we need, and the user then needs a carousel or a sign-up page, or it doesn't talk about these specific solutions. They keep solutions very agnostic. And also technology as well. So it doesn't talk about, yes, the user then uses an iPhone 5 or a MacBook with like this big screen and whatnot, and then uses a HTML5 website to check out this awesome dashboard or whatever. So we don't talk about technologies either. So what we do talk about is we talk about things that from the user's perspective. And when users are using your product, they don't think in terms of platforms or devices and stuff. They think in terms of, okay, I want to order some pizza, how do I do it? And what are the steps they need to get there? So why do you do it? These kind of scenarios, because they are a future description, a future story, they help us imagine the future product. And because we're designers, we are always designing products that will exist in the future, not products that currently exist. There's no point designing something that already exists. And they're also based on personas and behaviors and their needs. So it's not just based on what the system can do, can't do, business goals. It's actually based on what the users can or can't do. And it's also based on what are their strengths and weaknesses, how do they actually feel, what are the frustrations and stuff, what are the underlying motivations. And I think one of the most important things, they capture a sequence of events rather than screens. And a lot of times we are so focused on screen-based thinking, we think in terms of platforms like a mobile device or a desktop or a tablet. But what scenarios do, they break down those barriers in between the platforms, and they help us think, okay, this is the goal, and this is what the user wants to do. So it actually traverses multiple platforms and multiple systems to help the user get to the goal. And when you think across these multiple platforms and systems, it helps you create a more consistent experience, because you're not just thinking of one platform, you're actually thinking of the overall journey across multiple platforms. And also they help you guide design decisions, so that you're not just putting things on a screen based on opinions. So you're actually using data to actually make the design decisions, more accurate design decisions. So I think everyone in your design team or in your company should be able to tell the same story, same consistent story about how your user interacts with the product. If you ask a product manager, they should be able, the story that they tell about how a user signs up and gets onboarded, that story should be the same as how a developer would tell that story, or how a product owner would tell that story, or how a designer would tell that story. And if you don't have these consistent scenarios, then all those stories will be different stories. A PO will tell a story from their kind of KPIs and what they want to achieve. The user should be able to log in, and then they should be able to just go to this page and that page. They think in terms of very features and page-driven thinking. Whereas a developer might think in terms of, okay, this system talks to that system, there's this API here, and this one here. So it's very inconsistent in terms of how we actually think about the product. Whereas this brings that focus back into the user and make sure that everyone is thinking from the same perspective. And it avoids things like this, like where all these opinions being thrown around, someone says, we need that buy now button right there, or the button needs to be big and red. How about a hamburger menu? We have to make sure there's a hamburger menu there. Now, there's no kind of rationale behind why people throw these opinions. It's just opinions. They've seen something cool somewhere, but there's no evidence or rationale as to why they make these design decisions. And when you make these design decisions out of opinions, that's like a really risky place to be in. So what does the scenario then look like? So I did some work for these guys, the Crown Prosecution Service, and it was a pretty challenging project. So we only had 5 days, And we only had one day to go into the Crown Court in Southwark to actually speak to some of these court staff, like the clerks and whatnot. And literally, they were using systems from like the medieval times, like the 15th, 16th century, where they were using these massive ledgers and trying to keep track of all the cases that come in. There's like thousands and thousands of cases they have to keep track of. They have to write each line of case on these like individual lines on the ledger. Then someone else is then employed to then transfer all the data from one ledger to another ledger. And then someone has to then verify all the two different kind of tables on different ledgers, like paper ledgers. So there's like a lot of kind of time and money spent just on this manual work. So what we did was we had to actually automate that system. And what we did was basically we got into the same room with all the stakeholders, with all these different perspectives on how things should be built or what should be built. And what we did was we basically sat down and wrote a story. We wrote scenarios based on what users would do on the system. So we didn't have any personas either, so we basically on the spot made us some personas, some proto-personas, thinking, okay, we've got Harry, who's like a court clerk, and this is what his goals are, and this is what he needs to do. So he basically needs to make sure that the courts are not overbooked, and make sure that these the cases that are coming into the court is equally allocated across all the courts in London. So what we did was we sat down and we literally just wrote a story together of Harry going about his usual day in the future when our system already exists, and going through his kind of journey of how he would go about allocating cases across courts in London. So this was a story that we all agreed on. And based on the story, what we did was we went through the story, just circling things that Harry would need in the system. So things like he would need to check the resourcing across the region, he would need to look at information from each court, and based on that, we got a requirement. Okay, for the screen, on the UI, this is what Gary needs to see: a list of courts and the schedules. He also needs to see what trials are in progress and what are due to start. So he needs to see, the booking. The list of trials, and also the status of the trials as well. He also needs to see what courts have been overbooked and the reason for overbooking as well. He also needs to see what other courts are there in the region where he can allocate the trials. So he needs to be able to see this requirement, where a list of courts and their schedules. He needs to be able to then move the trials from one court to another trial. So an ability to move trials between courts. Also, at the end, he needs some kind of contact details of the officer at the other court to make sure that he can call them. So, based on that, he needs these kind of details in the UI. So what we did was we then pulled all this requirements into our screen that we designed. So instead of starting off with the screen, we actually started off from these little requirements in the scenario. And a lot of times what happens is we just gather together and then we just start off with the screen. And I think that's a very risky way of designing things because there's no rationale behind what goes on the screen. Whereas with this one, you can actually track back each design decision on the screen back to its original source, where you can say, okay, the reason we put this button here is because Harry needs to access that button at that particular moment. And also because the scenarios that traverse across platforms and systems and devices, it makes it easier for us to think cross-platform as well, and make systems more consistent across platform. So these kind of scenarios actually give you that consistent perspective in terms of making sure everyone understands the problem from the same perspective. If you want to know more about this methodology, I'd highly recommend this book, Designing for the Digital Age by Kim Goodwin. It's probably one of my favorite UX books out there. Really good book. Okay, now finally, consistency in interface. And this is something that most of us work on day in, day out. So one of the things that we do in our TV is to make sure that we establish a common vocabulary. And we do this across various elements in the vocabulary. So things like your branding, colors, typography, copy, interactions, iconography. And one of the things that we make sure we do by default is to stand on the shoulders of giants. And by that I mean giants like Google, who come up with frameworks and patterns like the material design, where they've already kind of decided how to actually design interfaces to suit different devices and whatnot. And they've already done a lot of thinking behind this. So why not piggyback on the thinking they've done and the amount of time and money they've spent? And there's no point reinventing the wheel. And also, Apple has their own design guidelines as well. So it makes things a lot easier to keep things consistent across these platforms. There's also this thing called atomic design by a guy called Brad Frost. So the concept that he's used is basically comes from chemistry. The periodic table of elements. Has anyone here done chemistry? Yeah, long time ago. So the concept is basically everything in the universe is made up of these core elements. So same in UI design. Everything in UI design can be made up of some of these core elements. So the whole concept is basically a concept of modularizing big pieces of products into these small chunks, which you can constantly and consistently reuse. An example of that, and I think one of the first examples of that, is Ford. So before Ford came in, people, car manufacturers used to make cars one at a time, handmade. So they make the whole car one at a time, another car one at a time. And when they made these cars one at a time, there was a lot of inconsistencies between cars, and there's a lot of safety issues and whatnot. But what Ford did was they basically, instead of manufacturing little components, which they could easily fit together, which meant that the cars were more consistent and they were faster and cheaper to build. Same with programming. You use objects. I'm a software engineer guy there. Yeah, I'm sure you know about objects. How you don't actually, if you want to create a poodle in a program, you don't create a poodle from scratch. You actually use existing objects or classes, like an animal or a dog, and then recreate the poodle. Same with UI design. We use these things called atoms, which then form into molecules, which then form into organisms and templates, and finally pages, which is basically the final page with the real data. And we also use something called patterns toolkit, where this is an example of something similar that we have in our TV. I'm sure, obviously I can't show you what we have in our TV, but it's something very similar, where we basically list all the patterns that we use across all the systems, where you have the typography, things like headings, paragraphs, and we also have things like form elements, colors, branding, tables, and widgets and things like that, which is stored on a server, which then all the dev teams can access, and which they can download and use within their interfaces. So yeah, finally, I think UX consistency is about creating that shared understanding across these different layers and across the goals, the interaction framework, and the interface. So goals, collaborate early and often. Interactions, make sure you think of scenarios first before screens. And interface, establish a common vocabulary. And that's it.
Thanks for that. Although it does just questions, just hold those questions.
Sure.
And we'll just switch over. We're running a bit late as well, so
I'll speed up.
keep moving. No pressure.
That's why I never plan my talks, because everything always goes wrong.
Over to Jason.
So my talk is entitled Broken UX. I'm just going to continue on from what's been discussed already. So without actually covering the same information, which would be quite boring and useless waste of time. So I'm going to actually show you some examples of good UX based on all these good principles and approaches, and then lots of examples of bad UX where it's broken down, and we can discuss why it's broken and so on. First, a little bit about me. I'm also a design coach. I've done 13 years of various kind of activities in the industry, from full stack development, front-end development, utilizing all these atomic designs at companies like Tesco.com, all the way up to designing banks and musical instruments, etc., 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 insurance companies, entertainment. So some examples of good UX that we've worked on is an app called MTV Tracks, which you can download nowadays. David has been kind enough to work with me on that, and this is the white label platform for mobile. So my talk is focusing specifically on mobile. We can talk about sort of larger ecosystems and so on. But it's a white label platform for mobile casual music listening. So it can be skinned up for different kinds of clients. In this case, it's MTV Tracks. It's also being used by Vodafone and O2. Another thing that I've been working on is this is a sketch of an instrument that actually looks like this. So it's a Seaboard Rise hardware instrument, which is an evolution of piano. So this has a silicon surface which you can press into, and then you can bend each note, slide and glide, press in, and express yourself in what we call 5-dimensional expression, whereas piano has on-off events. And so Seaboard Rise hardware controller works with an app, mobile app, both on iPad and iPhone via Bluetooth, so there's no cables required, and it's all just magic and integrated, and an absolutely groundbreaking musical ecosystem that's changing the music ecosphere. So an example of good UX from sort of mobile apps, as far as I'm concerned, Pinterest. I think Pinterest is an example of an app that's extremely consistent, and this has been the case for the last bunch of years. I sort of took these screenshots literally yesterday, so it's still the case. And I think Pinterest has deployed this atomic design and consistency to great level, to a point where actually it's something that I often call no design. There's no chrome, there's no kind of wrappers of anything. It's just content is king here, and Pinterest gives you this very it gets out of your way to explore that content. So the context is very minimal but very consistent, and actually they still achieve this kind of brand experience where, for example, here they've got a highlighted color where everything else is, effectively black and white. This is like one giant wireframe. This is a finalized app, but it looks like a wireframe, right? And often the time I've been told actually, well, when I hand over my wireframes to sort of developers and visual designers to do, sometimes visual designers would do like my wireframes to kind of apply design to visual design, and oftentimes people say, well, we actually prefer the look of your wireframe because there's something about kind of keeping something extremely simple to give content room to breathe, because like it was said before, the context of usage for mobile users is so busy that someone might be walking a dog, jumping on a bus, and trying to pin something, or trying to find animal and pets pins to buy that poop bag that was mentioned. So as you go across Pinterest app, there's only like 4 sections, so they're keeping it simple. Now this is again what I call magical number 4. People can only remember up to 4 things in their sort of immediate memory. So browsing through 4 sections is very nice and consumable, and then within each section they have sort of additional information, additional functionality that you can dig into as you sort of commit into using these bits. So my profile and everything's very, very kind of streamlined on Pinterest. Pinterest is an extremely, I would say, good example of mobile UX design. So let's look at some broken experiences and so discuss a little bit why I think they are. Some of you might disagree depending on sort of how you look at it. And so this is more like I've done a little bit of what you would call like expert review on some of the apps, and just kind of as a user of these apps, so kind of sharing some of my gripes. But before we start, this is actually a screenshot. This is actually a real screenshot from a digital design agency that's put up this testimonial that says, this is from some sort of e-commerce manager from Colgate saying, I think this is, and they're talking about this thing up there, which looks like an off-the-shelf kind of sort of bunch of designs, but they said, I think this is the best digital design I've seen. I'm actually quite overwhelmed. And it's talking about an app for toothpaste. It's like, oh my God, that's like so made up. That's a broken UX in itself, as in like a testimonial about effectively what is a dull app. But so what seems to be cropping up, and I've been around on the web before maybe some of you were even born.
So
You had a
that's
question?
Go back a step. One pace. What was it that's broken about that exactly?
So this app, it's like there's nothing specific in this. Like the app looks like something that you would find on like a sketch app collection of patterns, right? There's no kind of talk about why this was built, what was the business case, any of these kind of things, who the users are. It's just that like some sort of product owner who is, or manager who's never really kind of been familiar with the design process is going, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, right? Whether this is made, I guess this would be made up or some sort of like overhyped, but it's like nobody gets overwhelmed by a toothpaste app. Trust me on that, right? And if they do, they don't know anything about design. Sorry, this talk is going to be a little bit funny, hopefully. So what seems to be cropping up on websites, on mobile websites, is this never dying notion of a pop-up. Now I managed to grab a screenshot of this one because this one literally took ages to download. The pop-up, the overlay, took ages to download while I was kind of browsing this article. So by the time this close button had appeared, I'd already been kind of sitting there, waiting for about 30 seconds to actually be able to close this thing that had appeared first thing before I even tried to read the article. So never do pop-ups, right? Pop-ups is just bad design. And this is another bunch of examples. Believe it or not, this is also an overlay, which I can't even work out here how I close it. Maybe there's some sort of like an icon here. I think I was supposed to press this, but it's so invisible that and that's an independent website. So it's like a huge kind of overlay pop-ups that just obscure the experience. I got there to like read an article, and I'm looking at a bunch of. It's funny how that close comes across the guy's like head as well, which is just paradoxical. The other app, which I have terrible experience with. I've had this experience with this app for a long time, and it's from Apple. It's the voice notes, right? So I use it a lot of the time because I don't necessarily make notes from meetings. I just say like, look, I'm not going to take notes. I'm just going to kind of record the conversation. So afterwards, I can transcribe some of the most important bits, and we can have sort of rich conversation face to face. And afterwards, I can just sit and sort of, take highlights. So I use it all the time, and I also record some of my piano ideas and so on. As you can see, I recently recorded some lectures and stuff. But actually, to use this app, for me to actually now go to this other thing here, so at this point, when I've tapped into and I'm playing something, I can't actually swipe this screen until I tap away from this individual item. I have no idea why that is, but then I have to tap away to stop this, and then tap again to open this next item and then play, and it's very fiddly. I don't know why Apple, as a company that otherwise I think does amazing designs, is still quite happy to push this out and keep this in the sort of operating system as a default voice recording app. It's a terrible experience. Another one here from Google Analytics, where they've pushed some sort of update, which doesn't tell me that it's like, Google Analytics has been updated. Okay, what now? So, okay, I have to tap what's new. What would be nice is that if they could show me, like, this is new, that's just a few bullet points, rather than I have to now go somewhere else to read about that. But the one that catches my eye here is, understood. Yes, sir. Military tone of voice. Like, who speaks to their people, like, in this way? It's like, I don't know, again, like why a big company like Google would use this tone of voice, other than it's basically they haven't deployed any sort of design and UX thinking. And Google Analytics is a kind of tool that is very, very overwhelming to use for most people. The mobile app has the opportunity, and to some extent it attempts to kind of make it simpler and more digestible for users to use, but they keep kind of kind of almost like abusing the experience in the app over and over again. This is another one from Google Plus, where for some reason I was getting like what seems like Ukrainian there you go, Ukrainian kind of welcome page in Google Plus. I was in UK. I have nothing to do with Ukraine other than occasionally watching a football match when they play in Euros. So why does this happen? I have no idea. Again, from Google. Google Maps is one of the ones that I consistently have gripes with. Now, some interesting features in mapping tools and apps like this is the fact that, for example, they can pick up my home location. Now, there you go. It's like, look, my home address is 81 Church Road, London. Oh, that's great. I'll tap that. But guess what? It's picked up wrong Church Road. That's Church Road in Crystal Palace, not where I live. It's like a completely different area. How Google is not able to kind of pick this up properly from my device is beyond my kind of comprehension. I've gone into my address book to kind of change my home address and done that, and it's still kind of wrong here. So there's like huge opportunity there for the Maps tool to actually take me to a completely wrong place. So because I don't know how to change this now, that home there that otherwise would be useful and usable is actually just a chore. Like, you know, it's a wrong thing that keeps poking me in the eyes. But there's other things in Google Maps that are inconsistent. So for example, if I do a search to like a destination, and I'm talking mostly, so I'm not talking about sort of look and feel so much, I'm talking about functional consistency here. So how things work in terms of design is how things work. So if I do a search to go to a location, if I pick a car option, it will give me this beautiful big chunky Google material design prodable button, you know, that I can't miss even if I'm drunk. Shouldn't drink driving, but you know, quick trip in a car. You know, I hit that, and then it gives me that 3D kind of navigation option. So similarly, if I'm walking, it gives me that option. But then if I've chosen, you know, by going by public transport, it gives me a completely different option, even though in this case it's 5-minute walk away. So why doesn't it give me this option by default to be a bit smarter and also consistent? But more importantly, today, for example, I was coming to this venue, and yes, I had to walk a little bit and then take a bus. I don't understand why Google Maps show this kind of view where, like, initially to kick off my journey, I would have to walk. Where is my big kind of arrow, right, to start actually walking? It's impossible from this view. I have to tap there, which then hides that, which is an unusual interaction. Then it brings me to a map. Then I have to zoom in, and then I have to chase this little tiny little arrow that shows me which way I actually have to walk to get to my bus and so on. So that to me is very inconsistent and incredibly annoying all the time to use on Google Maps, where, you know, now I have to kind of battle through what most of the journeys are a combination of a little bit of walking and a little bit of bus. So if you thought that was like, okay, well, use Citymapper, right? But David was kind enough. David actually is a person who's walked the entire London manually. Have you finished your? Yeah. Not yet. How much have you walked? 3,000 miles. How much is that overall of London streets? 75%?
60.
So he's walked 60% of London manually using Citymapper, and he swears by this app, right? So he loves this thing. I don't use it myself, but he sent me the screenshot. He sent me a screenshot where here the issue is that you know, these exits out of the tube station, which are kind of useful to know where they are, so you can quickly go through the tube station. Because they're there displayed, you can't actually click on the tube station to zoom in, right? So there's a, like, obscured interaction there. So even Citymapper gets it wrong on some of these kind of quite important aspects. Here I thought, like, what caught my eye it's not the fact that I might know Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn. I don't actually, but it would be nice. It was the fact that here you've got this kind of 2 connect buttons, or like what you might call link buttons, right? But they're just slightly different size, and the way this has been kind of treated stylistically, just in this particular kind of swipe or through LinkedIn, just doesn't quite work for me. I don't think this is particularly that consistent. I don't know why they have slightly, bigger version of the same button. I understand they're sitting inside a different sort of card rendering, but to me this is slightly inconsistent. And I've heard lots of people complain about all sorts of different inconsistencies across LinkedIn, which I think has applied a lot of design thinking and a lot of sort of the style guides and consistency in recent years. But as soon as you go off in slightly non-usual sort of areas of LinkedIn, you start hitting quite an inconsistent experience. This is one from Coinbase, which is an app that allows you to buy bitcoins, which I use every day. Very nice app, very clean, again, kind of no design, simple, just like buy your bitcoins. And the issue is that, I understand what US dollars are, but we're in UK, and my setting in the app is pound, right? So I'm working in pounds. Now, this is a very big issue here because this app allows you to buy only £100 per day on your credit card or on your debit card. So I now have to work out in my head or somehow, because for some reason it's showing me US dollars here, even though I said I want pounds, I have to work out what is £100 in US dollars to buy my maximum daily allowance of Bitcoin. Very annoying, very inconsistent, and it's like a small thing that makes otherwise a beautiful app almost completely unusable. It certainly gives me so much gripe day to day that it's maybe this is just a bug. I don't know, but it's like huge impact on me because I have to do this day by day buying Bitcoin. Another example from Metro Bank, which is otherwise I'd say one of the best designed banks in recent years. Certainly, I've been sort of logged out of the mobile app, and it's asking me to enter my 14-character authorization code, which I've forgotten, but no actual kind of visible. If I look at this very carefully, I can see a help link, but that help link looks just like the text. It's very hard to tell the difference in styling. And so I look at this and I go, well, I don't know where to get this from. Why couldn't they put just a little, again, sort of note here? Because I was trying to do this like while I was kind of annoyed with Barclays Bank, right? And I needed to pay something quickly. So I'm like, where's my 14-character authorization code key? Where do I get it? And I was just looking at the screen and went like, this is a dead end because I don't know where to get this from, right? So it's kind of like, they haven't really handled this sort of case where a lot of people will switch devices and so on. The reason why I wasn't logged in was because I was previously logged in on my Android phone, which I no longer use, so I had to kind of log in on my iOS device now. So it was like, where is this? And this actually they say, it's been texted to me, but it wasn't. So, that's where kind of the breakdown of the process happened. The other app is Snapchat. I don't know, how many of you have issues with Snapchat, like usability-wise? Okay, can you tell me why? What's your biggest gripe with Snapchat?
I don't know, when I press on the small button, everything just goes all weird and the settings will move.
Okay. What about you guys? Like, yeah?
They've got the discover bit.
Uh-huh.
I don't quite know if it's interactive or not.
Okay.
Because sometimes you hold
Yeah.
down each videos and then try to click. It's kind
Yeah.
of weird.
Anyone else? Okay.
You go off to the left of the person,
Uh-huh.
you sometimes get that screen, it's just a person and a really big number, and you just don't know why. But
Okay.
you really want it to
Yeah.
go back right
Yeah.
towards photos.
So there's lots of these kind of weird sort of issues with Snapchat, and then they would say like, well, it's because people's mind, you're too old, you don't think like a child or whatever. It's like, yeah, I don't. So if you want me to use this day to day, you need to kind of fit it for me more. But one of the biggest things, and the CEO of Snapchat actually talks about this, where one of the biggest UX issues here is that to record a video, and Snapchat still thinks of themselves as a camera app, okay? Even though they think of this as 3 products. So this is the camera product, then this is the media product, and this is the chat, like messenger product, okay? But this is their core thing. That's why kind of like when you open Snapchat, you're landed on the camera. The biggest issue with this is, you know, I want to send my friend D, you know, a 6-second welcome to London skit that I play on piano. But to record that, I have to press and hold this button for 6 seconds. And they know this is an issue. So they're looking at ways in which, you know, Snapchat can be made more kind of like a thing that you can use without having your hands on while you're, you know, creating that content. There's lots of other issues around Snapchat in terms of how the navigation has been sort of rendered in a way here. I don't understand why they've compared to Pinterest. You know, Pinterest has that very kind of subtle, you know, which is standard iOS interaction, like navigation treatment. But it delineates what is navigation and what is content, right? Production sort of area. Whereas here, they've kind of stuck this sort of navigation thing on top of what is the content area. And it took me ages to actually work out that these are the things, these are kind of sections, these are 3 products of Snapchat as they think about it and so on. Yeah, I don't think there's a particular reason where this sort of visual rendering is required that way. This is a great one from Tesco where they've changed services on the back end, and so the API wasn't hooked up to the Tesco Club Card app, and I sort of spent like countless times logging in and it's not working, and then I tweeted them on Twitter saying, look, I can't log in onto your like app, I've changed my details on the website and I know 100% I'm typing in the right password, and they replied to me, it's like, oh yeah, well no, the API is broken, so you can't log in. And actually tried yesterday again, it's still not working. So, but it's like, they just say there was a problem with the username or password you supplied, enter your Tesco login details. It's like, no, there's a problem with your API and you're wasting my heartbeats for nothing. This is, you know, Twitter, where Twitter rolled in this moments feature. Now, the reason why I dislike this very much is because this is just newsfeed. This is just newsfeed that's trending from Twitter, but they've called that moments, and somehow that is supposed to be now my kind of core experience on Twitter that I'm supposed to kind of browse through. And it's like, I don't want that. It's it doesn't belong on Twitter as far as I'm concerned. But you know, they kind of forced it, as far as I'm concerned, they forced it onto users, and I know a lot of people have kind of had gripes with this. And it kind of takes away from the whole idea of Twitter, where it's like this area feels like it's been written by, and I think it has been written by sort of media organizations, whereas Twitter to me is all about, you know, what other people have to say. Or certainly comment. If you share a piece of news about Brexit, right, I want to actually see what you think about that piece of news, right, and then I might follow to read on. That's the interesting thing. This is kind of like a dark pattern, what you might call from Uber, where I tried Uber pooling, and I kind of requested Uber pool, and I sort of waited there for like 6-7 minutes, and you know, the guy was trying to find another person to pick up, and he couldn't, and I was like, well, I'm not standing here all night, it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm not standing here all night until he finds someone else to pick up as well, and then picks me up. So I wanted to cancel it, and they're like, well, there's actually a £2 fee to cancel, which they haven't told me before I actually ordered Uber Pool. Or I certainly haven't noticed it. So it's like, okay, now I'm having to pay £2 for waiting for 10 minutes for nothing. And the biggest one, I think, is Facebook Messenger. Now, Facebook Messenger is a very relatively new platform that's richly kind of, in digital terms, been rolled out yesterday. What they keep doing here is loading functionality into it. So the standard kind of Facebook Messenger smileys, which are a big part of sort of, you know, even in this sort of conversation, you can see, you know, people chuck smileys in all the time. The standard smileys are there, but then they brought in another set of smileys which you can sort of tab through endlessly and delete and so on. But those other smileys are still there, and they look different, and you can tab through them, but then you can go into search, stickers, and there's all this kind of like stuff there that I don't understand why that's not all sitting under one kind of sticker section on Messenger. that otherwise should be like a simple platform to use. And there's kind of like a dot, so even more stuff that you can derive there. Some actually really cool companies are now suffering from sort of not updating their platforms for a long time, or using kind of an off-the-shelf kind of something that wasn't ever really made for mobile in the first place. So this is a couple of screenshots from like Disney Mobile online shop. Got these kind of giant navigation sets which people hate to use online anyway, like on desktop, let alone on mobile. But then there's just like tons and tons of navigation, and the experience just isn't. Got Metro Bank again. Experience just isn't what it ought to be. It's like to get to the content, you actually have to battle your way through tons and tons of navigation, which is never required. And then another one is from what's becoming popular is these kind of connected toys and so on. And one of the cool things about connected toys is you can program them yourself. And this is an example from Sphero of like how their programming interface is laid out. Now, I'm a programmer from back in the day, and I look at this and I sort of show this to my son, and we just look at it and go like, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and it certainly looks awful. Doesn't feel like it's got any sort of structure to it, which you could argue that programming is like the most structured activity that humans do on the planet. It's like it's trying to linearize otherwise kind of quite messy processes, and so this is terrible experience. I think they've updated this app now, and I haven't checked what they've done to sort of if they've changed this at all. But what they've done with the kind of Sphero driving experience is they've gamified it to such an extent where like every 2 seconds when you press buttons, you kind of unlock a new sort of success thing, a new badge, and it's like to actually drive the thing, you have to go through like 20 levels of winning badges to actually then actually drive the thing. So yeah, that was me. I'm happy to talk. Reach out to me, Jason at uxcoach.me. We're building a company about coaching people design thinking and going into things how to fix that stuff and how to design more apps like Pinterest.
Don't go away, Jason. So if you've got a great app, just get Jason to have a look at it and he'll tell you all the problems. So, Nirish, if you want to come back up and do a quick Q&A. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask?
The fact that we're actually talking about how bad the Snapchat UX is, does that not prove that it's actually not effective?
You want to take this or shall I take it? I think Snapchat, counter to what my colleague here has spoken about in terms of this kind of nicely designed process of designing things with an intention, with finding out what users want and need. Companies like Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook and a lot of these companies have been built from sort of ground up through kind of lean UX approach, lean startup approach, which effectively has been like build. Oh, look, something works, right? We'll build more of that, right? And then, so what ends up happening is that design thinking is very kind of sort of post-applied to the process. So they've struck sort of chord with young audience, right? And they're kind of they have enough time to piss around and look for features and discover stuff, right? Because they haven't, got children and lives to live, right? Whereas the older audiences are like, well, if this is not making immediate sense to me, I'm just gonna, get my life, right? And so I think Snapchat are gonna have to capture broader audiences. They're gonna have to adapt their design in a way that's a little bit more standard.
Anyone else?
From your background, it really feels like to be a good UX designer, you have to have a good background in terms of development and coding.
Never said that. But anyway, I disagree. I think having an understanding of technology will definitely help you have better conversations with the tech team, but it's definitely not essential. I know a lot of great UX designers who don't have any coding background in tech, or maybe they don't really know any kind of coding skills, but they code really good user experiences. I think a more critical skill as a UX designer is being able to empathize with the users and being able to communicate that empathy across to your other big stakeholders like your business and tech teams. I think that's a lot more important than being able to code. I don't know what you think.
So I think it's not such a simple answer to that question. It depends on what kind of client and company you're working in, and also what the makeup of the rest of the company is like, right? So if you're the only designer in the company and then the company employs 1,000 people, you're actually going to probably want to get close to developers to make sure that the stuff that's actually going out the door is not complete crap, right? 90% is crap, right? So you want to stop that first because that's impacting the customer the most. It's going to go and they're going to use that. But then as you kind of hopefully build some allies in the company and the company starts realizing, hey, we need more of these people because they're stopping crap from going out and losing this money and so on, saving this money and making it better, then you might want to start moving into more strategic roles and saying, okay, let's plan first what gets built, what should be built, and more importantly, what shouldn't be built, right? Because the stuff that shouldn't be built that gets built is like the most costly. It needs to be maintained as well, and it takes time to build, and nobody knows why it was built. So you have to train people to support it because people just can't get why this was built. And then it also pisses people off inside companies. Like, we'll have this bunch of features that nobody ever uses, but nobody wants to kind of roll that out of the platform because it's complicated to do that. And it's also, it's like somehow people are emotionally, internally attached to that because I worked on that project. It was my baby. So no one's killing that, even though nobody's using it from the user perspective. So it depends how mature the company is in terms of design thinking. That's one of the reasons why we're doing design thinking coaching, is to empower you guys to be able to do more strategic impact on the company, as opposed to be sitting with developers and educating them that, hey, you shouldn't be just botching that stuff, like it doesn't matter, because it does matter. All adds up.
Either of you have any tips or ideas on the most effective ways to share audience insights with developers to help them empathize with audiences?
There are different techniques that we use to do that. Is first of all, we try to get developers actually attending these user testing sessions. I think that's probably one of the most effective ways to do it, to get them face-to-face with the users. Also get them attend debrief sessions, where they do agencies or like internal research teams. That also helps as well. And also getting them involved in the process as early as possible really gets their buy-in. So for example, something like a design studio workshop that I talked about, where we actually talk about the user goals early on, gets them actually start thinking about users as they go on and back to the desks and start coding their products, so that they're not actually building things in isolation, but actually thinking about the users. Those kind of things actually really work for us.
So just to continue on that, again, it depends on what kind of company you're working in. You might not be doing some sort of so strict and organized user testing sessions, and certainly in a company that's, let's say, 20, 30 people, you can't necessarily take developers and say, well, you're going to come to like a day-long user testing sessions to see actually what's happening, because it's costly and certainly perceived as costly. So what I typically have done is to bake in those personas into every process that impacts other people. So for example, in Agile user stories, you take that persona and say, yeah, persona helps us kind of sketch ideas and weed out 90% of the bullshit. But you actually then want to persist those personas into Agile stories and epics and say, who are we building this? Because as you were saying, as you go along, it kind of gets lost and muddled. And actually stakeholders will jump into, just as something's about to go live, they're like, let's just tweak that little thing, and before you even know, it's 90% bullshit. So bake in the personas into every step.
At what point do you deviate from standing on the shoulders of giants? Because those giants normally set patterns, and they become familiar patterns because everyone always uses them. And at what point, if you disagree with them, do you break from those patterns?
We basically like to follow platform conventions by default, unless we have a really good reason why we should be breaking them. We haven't really had a need to break them just yet. So, I don't know, like, you have to have a really good reason for breaking them.
Yeah, so basically,
examples like the
this is-
hamburger nap,
this-
a pattern that not
This is
everyone
we
loves.
had this issue on Music Cute stuff and then MTV Tracks where we assumed that hamburger was going to be like the most obvious thing, you know, it's kind of standard right across the board, and then we gave it to a bunch of 15, 16-year-old kids, and again it was slightly to do with like visual rendering, but also I think it was slightly to do with their general expectation across those kind of apps. You know, we're like, how would you navigate to another page within this app? You know, they were happy to sort of scroll up and down. How do you navigate to another view? And they're just kind of sitting there looking at it. You know, it's literally like a 10-second test. They didn't see the burger, and they certainly didn't think of clicking on it. And it was like, oh, this is completely not obvious to them. And then when we showed them, like, oh wow, there's more stuff to browse through. There's like albums and there's all sorts of stuff that they were actually interested in. But they just couldn't discover it. So my answer to that would be, when do you break away from platform from any convention? Is when you have enough evidence, right, that that's not working for your use case. And so, for example, you know, maybe at Snapchat, the standard stuff is not working for them, but it's not working for that younger audience. And then when you get grow into the sort of bigger audiences, you know, older people, it's just like, okay, well now that kind of thing is not working for these bigger people, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's basically about understanding your user's mental model in terms of how they think of how the journey actually works. So for example, if there's a light switch, actually this happened to me in Morocco, all the light switches work the opposite direction to how it works here. So here, like, you push down, then you push up. So every time I wanted to turn on the light, I was turning it off. So maybe the mental model of people in Morocco is different to the mental model of people here. So if we try to push our mental model onto them, then that doesn't work. We have different set of conventions. So again, like Jason said, it's about understanding those mental models.
It's actually, if you read the book, we're going to talk about Don Norman.
Yeah, about the switches.
Yeah.
It's more natural to that way as it is in Monaco, because I have the same issue here in London.
Yeah.
I'm from Czech Republic, and we have the same thing as in Monaco. It's an opposite. You don't think about switching, you know, turning it off and turning on.
This sort of mental
lights.
model thing.
No, it's. I mean, in electrical way and engineering, it's because when you have an issue somehow, health issue, you want to do something switch down to turn it off. You know, so that's the issue why it's turn it up is more difficult. So you should turn on the lights and turn it down. It should be very easy just to get it down. So that's the reason in factories and stuff like that. Everything doing.
We actually experienced this. First time I experienced this was when we were working on Tesco.com grocery. This was 8 years ago, where we had these kind of category section pages which were led by carousels. They're every marketing team wants carousel, and I sort of had this kind of bunch of people kind of in the marketing team sitting around me, and they were all happy with what we were doing and proposing. It's great. And as the meeting was finished, I just said, oh, by the way, as I press this right arrow, right, which way should the items in the carousel move? This way or this way, right? And there was a 50-50 split. Half of the people went, no, it's this way, that's continental way, that's the right way. And there's British people no, this is the British way, that's the right way. And they ended up getting into a quarrel for an hour, and I got told off afterwards by senior management for not asking stupid questions. But I didn't know at the time that was a stupid question to ask. But you can see that phenomenon replicate itself across all sorts of things that have that kind of 50-50 split.
Some of the UX issues, to me, they just look like bugs or errors, like the Google page in Ukrainian
Uh-huh.
or the
Yeah.
API issue
Yeah.
on Tesco.
Yeah.
So for me, this is either development or testing or QA. Or like,
Yeah, but
so how do you include that as a UX?
so what that is highlighting, those two examples are trying to highlight the kind of developer-led and mechanistically led culture inside the company where, you know, it was such a simple thing to say our API is not working, stop trying to log in. But they're like, you know, your credentials are wrong. It's like, no, my credentials are not wrong, right? And with Google serving me a wrong geo-targeted page, it's like this is a company that has 250,000 of the world's best engineers and they can't get that right. They still have these kind of bugs, right? Which they should have eradicated like 7 years ago.
The thing about bugs is there's still a UX issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there are issues for the user, but it's not something deliberate. It's not like the UX designer said, oh, let's display something in Ukraine. So how do you include bug fixing as part of UX? That's my question.
You can include it from, you know, the very start, as in like stuff that shouldn't be built, right? But then also like reward testers at the end of the process to actually, you know, not let through kind of bugs like that. And you know, there's like so solutions that kind of won hackathons and been funded, like, you know, tools like Teslio, right, that like gamify the testing experience. And it's like, you know, I'll give this talk tonight and, you know, like this is going to go online somewhere and someone from Google's going to see this and they still won't fix it. Yeah, there's million and million like bugs like this that have existed on Google for the last 7-8 years. They killed me in the head, but no one's fixing it. Why? Because the internal design, the culture isn't designed enough. It's like 250,000 engineers and 25 designers, you know? That's not enough.
There's a question around how do we include like bug fixing as part of the UX process? It doesn't need to be, because I think there's separate dedicated resources to do that, who are there to actually test the software, do some UAT, make sure that the functionality actually works. And I don't think you actually necessarily need to combine those two processes.
So you don't necessarily need to combine the processes, but the idea is how to develop a culture that's a customer-centric culture, right? So what I say to people at Rolly is that the customer support person is as much a UX designer as I am, because when something breaks down and the person phones up and says, I just fucking spent like £1,000 in this product and it's not working, blah, 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 even if they haven't plugged it into electricity or whatever, that guy on the support call is the UX designer at that point, right? So the tester is the UX designer at the point of testing for bugs, right? And they should be able to pick this stuff up and feed back into the process, not because they're testing the system, but they're designing an experience, yeah? And so design thinking includes system thinking as part of it, but it's much more customer-centric throughout the process.
Yeah, just going back to the hamburger, is there any research and evidence to suggest this is counterintuitive? Because I've read that on several blogs actually, that it doesn't work because you have to figure it out. And exactly going back to your example actually, you just mentioned that with kids. You know, so you could suggest that it's counterintuitive.
I think it's almost like the switches, right? In 50% of cases it works, in 50% of cases it doesn't. And you really have to, that's why you have to do user testing to work out whether for your audience it's violently wrong, right? Because when he said like, you know, this was down to switch off, right? Yeah? It was down to switch off or switch on? Switch off, right? That's down to switch off. Some people went, ugh, you know? So it's like visceral reaction against that for some reason, right? So, you know, if you test with 10 people and, you know, 8 of them say, that's wrong, it's wrong for your project.
Yeah, I mean, when we do our kind of mobile app testing, we usually get maybe 1 out of every 8 users, especially like the elder users. They might not know what the hamburger menu means. But for the majority of our users, they are already get it. So
how many users would you expect to have for a user test, for a usability test?
we usually do something around like 8 to 10 per kind of study. Not too many than that. But I mean, a lot of times like the hamburger has become a conventional metronome for a lot of users. It's just a learned behavior now. But there are still like a lot of people who are not used to using smartphones. They might ask something like that.
there are other nuanced points about hamburger menus, for example, which is that you'll end up hiding a whole bunch of kind of pointers to other places in the app, right? From there, and then so the user, if they don't see that explicitly there, right, they have to remember to hit the menu to see the option and then go into the option. Right, whereas the kind of strip bar at the bottom with options is just always there, and you can chuck like some notifications, or there's like you've got new pins to check or search for something new or whatever. That kind of stuff is like immediate prompt, and it's like one tap versus two taps, right? So there's kind of ergonomic reasons why you wouldn't want to do burger menu, and that's why also to some extent Snapchat doesn't have them, because it's like quick. Because they're talking about like at Snapchat they're talking, whereas most companies are looking at monthly active users as their kind of measure of customer dedication to the tool, right? They said like for us even the daily active users isn't enough. Internally we use hourly active users. So Snapchat is used every hour, a few times an hour. So it has to be quick, right? And that's the challenge there, to design something that's quick but has also lots of functionality.
Thanks, guys. Well, we're going to go upstairs if you're around for drinks. Just run the doors to us.